Good morning, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. We have finished up our last unit, or part of our unit, which was on just the plant kingdom in general, and now we are moving on to plants without seeds. With plants without seeds, we're going to be looking mostly at our non-vascular plants and then our seedless vascular plants. But for this video, we're just going to be focusing on the non-vascular plants. So if you remember, non-vascular plants do not have that vascular tissue which allow them to grow taller or higher up, and they also have difficulty absorbing water. They do not have a root system. They have many limitations. They have to be in a very moist environment. Okay? So for this, one of the big things you're going to think about are moss. Moss is a very large species of plants for our non-vascular plants. The major one of the three categories, because it has, oh man, over like 10,000 or so different species. And when you think about moss, it's kind of like this green, moist, spongy, soft kind of thing you can touch, and it's on like rocks and stuff. But if you actually are able to name any, there's several different, like I already told you, there's several different species like peat moss and some other ones. But let's not get into that because I'm not too worried about you identifying different types of moss, just the broad category of moss and the other three non-vascular plants. So with that, let me move us over here. I got my subtitles going on down here, so hopefully that'll help you out with what I'm saying. If not, let me know. I can always remove them in the future. So, main thing, three types of non-vascular plants. Our three types. Oh wait, I gotta put my little, oh, I can't put it on right now. Our three types are gonna be moss, liverwort, and hornwort, okay? With each of these three, these are all low-growing plants that live in moist environments. So they're low-growing, and they live in a very pretty wet environment. Okay, they need that moist environment in order to survive because they do not have that vascular tissue to transport water and food and other materials throughout their body. And remember, they also have to transport from cell to cell because they don't have that vascular tissue. So these three, they are going to be all low growing, really short, and they're going to be in very wet environments. Okay, plants without seeds for our moss. So here is kind of a quick little picture of what the moss will look like on the right here. As I was telling you earlier, there's over 10,000 species, so there's lots of them. Down here, oh, let me see if it'll show it. There we go. It's going to just throw it on there. Down here is going to be the rhizoid. This is going to look kind of like a root, but it's not actually a root system. It's just more of an anchor that helps it to lock on to whatever it's growing on, if it's a rock or some kind of really, really wet structure. But it's just going to be a way for it to anchor on, to hold into place. Not for the purpose of absorbing stuff, but it does help and allow for absorption, but it's just mostly to hold on to whatever it's growing onto. As you go up the structure, you can see other parts of the structure that look very familiar, like we have the stem-like structure here with a bunch of leaves kind of growing out of it, so we see that's very familiar. This main part right here with the stem and the leaf, that's the gametophyte section of, or kind of like stage of the plant. So this is where it's producing its zygotes and fertilized eggs and regrowing. Up here is where the sporophyte section is, where it's going to be releasing its spores because it's a vegetative type plant. It's not going to reproduce on its own or with it's going to reproduce differently by releasing those spores. So you have the stalk to extend the capsule where all the spores are going to be released up out of the top here. Another section, or another type of our non-vascular plants are liverworts. Those ones, there's only about 8,000 species or so. If you go back here, these are the ones that they look like a little human liver, and they're gonna grow on rocks and soil along streams. But the main reason why it gets its name liver is because it's shaped like a human liver, and in Old English the word wart actually meant plant, so like liver plant is what they called it. Hornworts, those ones, let's go back to this one. Those ones have this longer, leafier, like kind of setup structure. There's only about 100 of those species. There's not a lot of hornworts. They're very kind of small in their diversity. And they're mostly found mixing in with other grass-type plants. So they're not very like hanging out everywhere in the water. They're going to mix with some very moist grass areas, not necessarily going to be directly on the water soil, or the water near soil. Ugh. I'm having a hard time talking, y'all. So one thing I want you to think about, how are mosses and other non-vascular plants going to be limited by the lack of their vascular tissue? So this is kind of connecting to what we were learning about last time. I want you to think about that question. So how are moss and other non-vascular plants limited by their lack of vascular tissue? How are they limited without that tissue and being able to survive? I want you to answer that question in the classroom chat, okay? And stick around for the next video.